because we think in this colonial southern way that, oh, well, there aren't enough people in the Arctic. Funny, nobody in Iceland says that. Nobody in Norway says that. They got a population of 4 million and they don't think there are too few people in the north to have a university. Only in Canada do we think that way because really we want to have the universities in the south and send our professors up there for a month in the summer, you know, on a nice colonial expedition. I'm not saying they're bad professors. I'm saying the structure is colonial. It's absolutely colonial and it's not getting any better. So the newcomers had to adapt, they had to learn, they learned from the people who were here. They weren't adapting to the place, they were adapting to the way in which the people who were from here lived in the place. And it was, you know, things as basic as how do you move around. And one of the things, you know, that's really interesting is, of course, that Canada is the only example of an European imperial experiment in which the Europeans came to the colony and immediately abandoned the European means of transport and adopted the local means of transport, the canoe. And they adopted it for about 250 to 300 years. This is, in other words, it wasn't just, hey, Mom, I'm going to use a canoe until I get established. They actually built the wealth of the country, the fur trade, which is the basis of the wealth of the country. It's not some arcane thing. They built it by using Aboriginal means of communication. And sometimes when you say this, people say, oh, yes, but you know, it must have been an inferior civilization here because they didn't have the wheel. Well, of course, the reason they abandoned the wheel immediately is because in the Canadian Shield, the wheel breaks. So sophisticated people don't do stupid things. They adapt themselves to the place, which is precisely what they did. But the most important thing was the way in which they adapted to the ideas of the place, the philosophies of the place, which came out of First Nations civilizations. That's the interesting thing. I mean, quite apart from anything else. And it's that, of course, which we have denied so completely. We'll sort of admit to the food and the canoes and stuff like that, but we won't admit that behind that utilitarianism lay something far more important, which was an idea about how to live here. An idea about how to live here, not the practical. A theory about how one might go on living here. And the other thing about the conversation which is so fascinating is that it was essentially an oral conversation. Now, if we were a proper Western, Westphalian nation state, belonging to Europe, we keep saying we're the most European of the North American nation states. We're much more European than the United States. It's completely the opposite. We're the least European country there is in North America. Right? Well, I mean, there's lots of us from Europe, and we've done things, and I'm not criticizing my grandparents, and, you know, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is the way in which we run Canada is deeply non-European, whereas the United States is the child of Europe. The United States is the child of the Enlightenment, of rationality. I mean, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, that's all pure Enlightenment European theory. And then, of course, American nationalism is pure 19th century European, Westphalian, monolithic nation-state nationalism. They're the European country. They're sort of camping in North America. Right? I'm not being insulting. I'm just, from a philosophical point of view, they're camping in North America. We actually are here, for better or worse, acting badly or well, because the only way to survive here is to be from here. You can't be here on the basis of European theory. For example, if we used European nation-state theory, we'd have had a civil war long ago. Because European nation-state theory is all about a monolithic nation-state. One language, one religion, one race, one mythology. That's European nation-state theory, right? We're the exact opposite of that. That's why we're so confusing to ourselves, because in our universities, including this one, in our philosophy departments, we teach European philosophy. We say we teach philosophy. We don't teach philosophy. We teach European philosophy as if it actually had some relevance here, which it doesn't. I'm not saying it's not interesting as sort of anthropology of a strange place. I'm not saying it's stupid. I'm saying it's irrelevant. Unless it's rethought in a serious way. So, I'm going to come back to this. And let me just give you a last kind of introductory. My problem is I usually use up my whole time doing the introduction, but anyway. Let me just give you, I want to get your minds around the way in which in the late 19th century, at the height of the British Empire, we allowed colonial figures to rewrite our history, our way of imagining ourselves completely, which of course involved writing out of existence, not simply the role of Aboriginals, but the existence of Aboriginals. I mean, that was part of the project. It was also a big attempt to write out the existence of French Canadians, which then led the French Canadians to write out the English Canadians, you know, which is, who can blame them, right? And, you know, our universities, which were then really getting going, busily, of course, had to hire really smart people. So we went and hired third-rate people who couldn't get jobs in England to set up our universities. And, of course, in French Canada, they went and hired right-wing, anti-democratic, ultramontane priests, you know, who ran their universities. So we had this really strange clash between third-rate people from two countries representing the empires of those two countries, reinterpreting Canadian history, to deny that we'd actually already been working at this for thousands of years, and specifically since the Europeans arrived, we've been working at it for 250 to 300 years. But they rewrote all that out of existence and made us this nice little English, loyal, you know, empire place. I can tell you, you go back and read, you know, Louis-Philippe Lafontaine and Robert Baldwin, the founders of Canadian modern democracy in 1848. You read the address to the electors at Terrebonne, 1840. Another one of those documents, right? Probably the single most important document of political philosophy in Canada. How many have heard of it? 1, 2, 3. Oh, you are an above average audience. There are about 10. And it's usually 4, you know. And why do we teach it? Well, because it suggests that we would do things differently here. Anyway, you go back and you read that. I can tell you that Lafontaine and Baldwin's description of Canada as a democracy is not this lovely little loyal English pink place. It's a Canadian place. It's anchored here. And every document you pull up that's really about this place is not that Victorian, romantic, English outpost. It's actually a very interesting idea of what could be done in this place. Some of them, at various periods, are either generated by Aboriginal people. Some of them are very much part of the relationship between our Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals, and some of them have forgotten, but it's in the documents, even if they've forgotten, it's coming up out of the collective unconscious. So a really good example of this turning around of the way we think about ourselves is, you know, the Metis people. You know, this amazing creation of a whole concept of people as complexity. When the Europeans, the English, the French, the Germans, were busy killing each other and denying difference in order to create the mythology that a people was simple, transparent, one race, right? One mythology, all that stuff. And here in Canada, we were busy creating this new people who were the image of complexity, of non-transparency, if you like. And that's really interesting. I mean, that's really fantastic. That's really postmodern. It's really not at all what Europe was doing and would go on doing until they killed 100 million people between 1914 and 1946 of their own in a civil war to try and make people not Métis, to put it in the simplest possible way. Right? That's what those wars were about, was a denial of the possibility of complexity. The necessity of believing that the nation is a pure, lovely, transparent thing where everybody is English or Gaulois or German or whatever. You know?